It had been over a week since both Fern and Frieren had left for the first class mage exams, leaving both Stark and Francis to their own devices. But of course, this wasn't going to be some vacation. No time for relaxing or anything of that nature. They were still going to have to work up on their training. And for Frieren, the best case she had for them was to stockpile their mana. Before leaving, she placed limiters on both of the boys. You see, in the world that they inhabited, the use of mana and the use of magic, it wasn't as cut and dry as you might think. Mana wasn't something that could just be used to cut on and off like a light or flipping on and off like some form of switch. No, mana, no matter how you sliced it, was something that was used for everything. Every time you walked, every time you swung your arms around, every time you so much as blinked or twisted your head, even if it were just a small sliver, a mere fraction of mana was being used in that moment. It just escaped the body. It was natural. However, what Frieren had done was something to expedite the process. You see, there were many methods of getting stronger. Among them was suppressing one's own mana. However much you wanted to suppress, that was up to you. But when you put a fixed cap on how much mana you expend, well, all that other mana gets saved up in your body. Then you're able to bring it out to the forefront, bringing yourself to a new level of power you didn't even know was possible. For Frieren, she may have chose the extreme, sealing away both of the boys to around 95% of their mana. That meant that the 95% of mana that they had each day was being stockpiled inside of them, like reservoirs or a dam that was storing up water, something that could be used for a later date and time, allowing for it to come forth and burst all at once. So for now, what would the boys do with their mere 5%? Well, they'd have to train. For Francis, he was given a grimoire from Frieren. It was based on wind magic and the application of it. After all, that was his affinity. So applying wind magic to his fighting style, that would be applicable. While Stark would focus on applying lightning style magic to his attacks, when he wasn't channeling or using the power of Thor that he was gifted. In fact, ever since his fight with one of the Demon King's generals, he hadn't used that power ever since. It always wiped him out, and he didn't have full control over it, so it was more of a last resort than anything else. For now, though, the boys only had themselves to work with. They'd practice and spar, and if they weren't doing that, they were running errands for the people of Orsburg. And whenever that wasn't being done, they'd use that free time to go out to eat and, well, enjoy themselves. Although they did wonder how the girls were doing. In the meantime, just as in the original story, the first class mage exams would be going about the same as it were in the original timeline. Frieren was being placed into a 3-party team along with 2 other girls by the name of Kane and Lawin, while Fern was placed in a team with a girl known as Ubel and a boy known as Land. The purpose of this test, all the teams were placed into a particular area with a barrier surrounding them. Inside of the barrier were special birds known as Stilla. They were powerful creatures, not your average or ordinary bird, as they could detect mana and they were staying clear of it. As such, trapping them would be a lot easier said than done, and they only had 3 days to do it. Just as in the original story, Frieren and her team would work on squeezing the Stella's source of water. After infusing the large lake with mana, they'd know that the Stellas would have to go to small pockets of waters like ponds or puddles and other places that hadn't been affected, making their water supply far and few between. But of course, there were other teams that had taken notice of this. There were only but so many Stellas inside of the area, and as such, only so many teams would be able to pass. Also, to keep in mind, if any member's team were to die, then they would automatically fail even if they caught a Stella. So, in the end, they were hard to come by, and passing would be even more difficult. It wasn't that killing was unnecessary for this assignment, but it was more so used to weed out the chaff from those of the higher class. Of course, in the grand scheme of things, one couldn't help but wonder, why exactly were people going through life and limb to become a first-class mage? It wasn't like you had to go through all this hell unnecessarily. You could get promoted in other ways, and you could even take your time going from class to class. Not everyone who was a third class had to jump to a first, or even a second for that matter. So why was the risk worth the reward? Frieren knew all too well. You see, the one in charge of the current Magic Continental Mage Association was none other than Seer, an elf, just like Frieren. However, she lived for a much longer period of time, and being the overseer of the association, around 58 years ago, a special provision was put into place. Anyone who achieved the rank of first class would be given a spell. One single spell from Seer herself. Of course, to everyone, Seer was known as the Mage of Mages, the true quintessential master. Among all mages on Earth, it was believed that she alone was the closest to the true living embodiment of the goddess herself. There wasn't a spell she wasn't capable of learning. There wasn't one that she probably didn't know. And any ones that were out of her grasp never stayed that way for long. To gain the rank of first class meant that you would personally get to meet with Seer, and that she would personally grant you any one spell you wanted. Granted, as long as she knew it, but when she knew almost every spell in existence, you could only begin to fathom that type of power. Having access to any kind of spell you wanted, anything, there were no limits to what you could do. As long as she knew it, she'd gladly give it to you. Many who became first-class mages went on to use that said power, propelling themselves in their own fame and fortune and any other quests that they might seek out in this world. It's what attracted many people, and what made the risk and reward so tempting. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. However, as the proctors were overseeing the exams, there was someone else who was making his way as well. Under the cover of night, the figure would approach the barrier, holding out his hand from under his red cloak. He touched the barrier and found that he could not pass. It was just as he thought. A barrier so powerful that not even the dust can penetrate. Truly the work of a first-class mage. No, maybe even beyond that. But I know that Frieren is inside of there. Whatever shall I do? I could wait till the exams are over, bide my time. He'll give me a chance to come up with a more fine-tuned strategy. Or I could just wait outside the barrier, waiting for the opportune time to strike and to pick her off. No, she'll most likely see that coming. All the same, it won't stop me. Just a temporary setback. The hooded figure would return back from the dark in which it came. For now, there was nothing that he could do. Well, he wasn't devoid of a few options, but he knew he'd need every advantage in his arsenal to take down Frieren. This wasn't something that he took lightly. The one in question, the one known only as the Hood to many in the criminal underworld, a bounty hunter who hunted indiscriminately, man, woman, child, elf, demon, or any sort of mythological creature, it made no difference to him. If you were a name that came across his path and the payment was right, well, you were a dead man either way. But then that left Frieren. This wasn't the first time, no. This was not the first time at all that Frieren's name had come across his desk. While there were many in the world that sung Frieren's praises and looked to her as the hero of heroes, there were those who did not share those sentiments. For everyone that loved her, there were just as many people in the world that hated her all the same. And yet, there was one thing that to those who loved and hated Frieren, they all had in common. No one was willing to challenge her. Frieren could be as humble as she wanted, but deep down, she knew that her reputation preceded her. There were plenty of bounty hunters throughout the years, throughout the centuries. Everyone that thought they could make a name for themselves by killing Frieren the elf, only to be met with a grisly demise, because they soon realized that they were in over their head. You see, when you come at the king, or in this case, the master mage, the mage of all mages, you'd best not miss, because you only get one opportunity. You only get one chance to strike. And for the Hood, he knew this all too well. Is why he turned down going after Frieren for all these years. Every time someone came to him with an offer, claiming it's an offer you can't refuse, he'd always turn them away like they were fools. He was powerful, yes, and it wasn't about having any lack of confidence. But confidence only gets you so far on the battlefield. Confidence in brains is what's needed. And he knew, at least for the right price, there was nothing that anyone in this world could offer him. Nothing that would be worth taking on Frieren. However, one person came to him. One person made that offer. That offer that he just couldn't refuse. The man in question, if you could even call him that, he didn't look like much. He looked like a man dressed in rags, something sickly. A man all green. And yet the man in green, he made him the offer, the payment being more than enough. And then suddenly, there was newfound courage. Of course, this offer was made over 3 years ago. 3 years of planning, 3 years of tracking, 3 years of preparing. Of course, he had to gauge for himself. He had to know truly what he was getting himself into. So during that time, he spent the next 10 years preparing. He spent 10 years gathering money, power, everything he could possibly need to kill Frieren. Eventually, there was someone who came to him with an offer that proved to be worth his while. One of the 7 sages of destruction, one of the Demon King's generals, Aura. She contracted him to retrieve for her the scales of obedience. And this was all that he would need to gauge just where he was lacking. When he gave Aura the scales and knew exactly what she was trying to do, all he had to do was wait and see. Observe for himself how the battle would play out. Yes, he gave Aura the scales of obedience, but only after he commanded her to use them. He used the scales and waged his mana against Aura, and she lost. That meant that she was now under his control, but that wasn't enough, no. He wanted to see how powerful Frieren was, and what better way than to use a guinea pig? He sent Aura. Aura was going to be the one to fight Frieren. He figured if Aura had more mana than Frieren, then his job would be all but done. But if Frieren was able to overpower her, then he knew he'd have to act accordingly. And predictably enough, Frieren proved to be victorious, defeating the likes of Aura. So now he had to move to the next phase of his plan, the plan that brought him to Orspurt, that led him to the Association of Mages. Definitely a cluster of powerful individuals, but outside of Frieren, and maybe Seer herself, he wasn't worried about anyone else here. Killing them would be easy, although it would be an annoyance. When you have this many capable first-class mages all gathered together at once, it's not something you take lightly. It's not about the quantity, it's about the quality. But that only gets you so far, when eventually the quantity proves to be too much. And he knew for a fact that there was no one here that was going to actually push Frieren to her limits. But that wasn't the goal. The goal was to stretch her thin, to stretch her attention on all fronts, to overwhelm her, and when the opening was right, to take her down. After all, he'd only get one chance, one opportunity to strike down Frieren. He knew when that moment would be, and he wasn't going to waste it. He would leave from the examination area and ascend into the mountains, finding a pond secluded from everywhere else. Reaching into his cloak, he pulled out a sack. Reaching inside, he found the rare artifact that he had been given. 5 Norn stones. Norn stones were truly powerful. So much so as an artifact, many believe that they didn't even exist. And it wasn't a matter of the Norn stones no longer existing. It's just that no one had the balls to make them anymore. You see, to make a Norn stone, it required a massive sacrifice. If he had to take a guess, he'd say that there were roughly probably 3, maybe 4 billion souls trapped in these things, collectively, of course, over a period of time. They were truly the most evil of evil. You had to truly be a heartless individual to even attempt at creating them, even more so at using them. He dropped the 5 Nord stones into the pond before casting down and looking at his own reflection that began to morph and change, changing into the vestige of a man set afire, with eyes piercing with evil. So, you finally got a hold of the Norn stones. Such an archaic relic. Archaic, yes. But it makes results. Indeed. Whenever someone chooses to use the Norn stones, it's because they wish to get out of a bargain with me. No one ever wins a bargain with the likes of you. But I figured this would supplement your appetite. An appetite filled on weaklings, pathetic men, women, and children, and even damned animals and other creatures. God-forsaken are those who use the Nord stones. You know that in doing so, your soul will not be received in either heaven or in the underworld itself. You will be cursed to purgatory. And I'm fine with that. Not like I ever want to see your sorry face ever again. This will be the last deal you and I will ever make. So I hope you plan to use my power well. How much time shall I grant you? How much do you request to use my power? I'd say roughly till sunrise, so about 12 hours should do it. And to even sweeten the pot, I'll give you Orspert as a sacrifice. High-class mages, I'm sure you can't turn that down. Who is it that you want to kill? Frieren. Frieren the elf. She is my target. Grant me the power needed to slay my enemies, and I will give you the city of Orspert, and even more so, I will give you Seer, the master elf, as a tribute. Seer. It has been far too long since she and I were last acquainted. The sorcerer supreme of that realm. I hear you've been having a lot of troubles with sorcerer supremes. What about that Uzumaki boy? The damned fox. He is no longer the supreme sorcerer of his world. He has passed down the title to one of whom he trusts, a man by the name of Uchiha. But no matter. I will be rid of them both in due time. No matter what the world, all sorcerers will fall just the same. But if you will bring me the head of Seer, then your request shall be granted. Do not fail me, Robinson. As you wish, Lord Dormammu. With that, the vision would clear from the pond, as the hood turned back once more, seeing a light emanating from the dome barrier of the examination. As the sun was starting to set, the time to strike would soon come, and the death of Frieren would follow into the night. This concludes Frieren, the Elf and the Archer, What If Frieren Trained Hawkeye, Season 1, Part 9. As always, if you enjoyed today's video and everything else that we have to offer, then please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is PowerCore Productions and Podcastings that has to come out now and in the future. And stay tuned tomorrow as we'll continue with What If Frieren Trained Hawkeye, Season 1, Part 10. But anyway, that's going to do it for the end of today's video. I'm Javon Harrington with PowerCore Productions and Podcastings, signing off, and I'll see you next time.